There was a good deal of truth in the stricture, for La Duchesse de la Valliere was to be found in the room of every lady of Malmaison. Its extraordinary success stood the test of 10 editions, and many aspiring La Vallières no doubt profited by its lessons. But the emperor had no intention of establishing a favorite. There shall be no petticoat government in my court, he said. It was the bane of Henry IV and Louis XIV. My mission is a graver one than that of either sovereign, and Frenchmen have become too serious to tolerate recognized favorites and official mistresses. His true mistress, as he often said, was power. Its conquest has cost me too dear, he would add, for me to allow of its being snatched from me, or even coveted by another. He felt that insidious advances had been made. The lady was too clever and well tutored to formulate demands on her own account. She could not have accepted marks of distinction that would have given rise to comment or roused the suspicions of a husband by no means disposed to be complacent. The utmost she had ventured to solicit on her own behalf was the post of lady-in-waiting, a dignity from which her youth, her birth, and her position seemed to preclude her, nor was it possible to justify her preferment on the grounds of any former connection with the Bonapartes. The appointment therefore caused some discussion and many a covert smile, but the favorite's moderation in her own case put her at greater advantage in furthering the cause of others, her patrons of yesterdays, her protégés of today. Murat, already Marshal of the Empire, was promoted to the dignity of Prince High Admiral, which admitted him to rank after Cambacérès and Lebrun among the Serene Highnesses, but at the same time Napoleon, on his own initiative, appointed Eugène de Beauharnais Prince Arch-Chancellor of State, of equal rank with Murat. By this measure, the balance was struck between Bonapartes and Beauharnais, with some slight inclination in favor of the latter. There is a striking difference between the terms in which the emperor announced the two decisions to the Senate. Every turn of expression seemed to mark the space that divided his stepson from his brother-in-law in his affections. In the one case, we feel that he yields to outside pressure, to family expediency, to selfish solicitations. In the other, the words gush from a fount of pure feeling and give an echo of his best self. Amidst the cares and trials inseparable from our high rank, we have sought and found solace in the tender affection and faithful friendship of this dear child of our adoption. Our paternal blessing will follow the young prince throughout his career, and with the help of Providence he will not fail to deserve the praise of posterity. And Eugène had asked for nothing. He had seemed perfectly content with his honors as Grand Officer of the Empire and his command as Colonel General of Chasseurs, and was already on his way to Milan at the head of the cavalry of the guard. His new position was a distinguished one, and there is a curious fatuity in Madame Remusat's contention that this, the highest compliment the emperor could have bestowed on a general of 23, was in fact a punishment. In any case, this punishment, which she supposes to have been the result of an outbreak of jealousy on the emperor's part, was of brief duration. Eugène set out on January 16th in obedience to an order dated January 14th that the guard should proceed to Milan in readiness for the coronation. A fortnight later, he received a private letter from the emperor enclosing a copy of the message to the Senate and his nomination as Prince Chancellor of State. No more significant proof could have been given that Napoleon was reconciled to Josephine, that he was no longer to be played upon, and that the passion on which so many hopes had been built had died out, was no longer quickened by restraints. It had perished of satiety. The intrigue began at Malmaison in the depth of winter. It closed at Malmaison before spring, during a sojourn of a week or two made there by the court, on which occasion the usual formalities were much relaxed. Napoleon was able to walk and talk constantly with the lady, and to visit her whenever he pleased. Josephine kept her own room, spent her time in tears, growing thinner and more melancholy every day. One morning the emperor came to her apartments, addressed her with all the kindness of former days, acknowledging he had been very much in love, but that it was all over, and begged her to help him out of his entanglement. Josephine readily undertook the task. She summoned the lady, who showed herself equal to the occasion, betrayed no emotion, and met the Empress's attack in haughty silence with a face of marble impassibility. She always retained a faithful attachment to the Emperor, though he seems never to have renewed his homage after Austerlitz. If he ever yielded to a passing return of his former fancy, the feeling was so fugitive that it was barely noted by most observant. He invariably treated her with the greatest consideration, was prodigal of such privileges and favors as were compatible with her husband's position, and always included her among the first recipients of court honors and distinctions. In return, she showed herself one of the most faithful adherents of his fallen fortunes. Her beauty graced the fetes of the 100 Days, and when the victim of Waterloo was about to quit his country forever, she was one of the last to visit him on June 26, 1815, at Malmaison, the scene of the dawn and eclipse of their brief romance, offering the discrowned emperor the true tribute of her respectful attachment and imperishable devotion. Chapter 7. Stephanie de Beauharnais. Even before Austerlitz was lost and won, Napoleon determined to strengthen the political alliances he had entered into with the reigning houses of Germany by a network of domestic contracts. He was convinced that his system would never be firmly established in Europe until the blood of the Napoleonists had mingled with that of more ancient dynasties. In default to such hopes as he might have entertained in his own person, he gathered all the marriageable youths and maidens of his family round him and awaited his opportunity for the formation of the ties he considered all important, because he judged them to be beyond the hazards of political fortune. In this way, he hoped to bind the princess to him by means of family interests and affections. The first result of this policy was the marriage of Eugène de Beauharnais and the Princess Auguste of Bavaria. Immediately after the conclusion of the campaign, she was betrothed to the Prince of Baden. But this was an obstacle of slight moment, as a set-off to the husband he had bestowed on the princess. Napoleon was quite prepared to find a wife for the prince. His choice fell on another Beauharnais, Stephanie Louise Adrienne, daughter of Claude de Beauharnais, Comte de Roche-Barreau, and of Adrienne de Lizet-Marnizia, his first wife, cousin in the 6th degree to Hortense and Eugène. Born in Paris, August 26, 1789, she was left an orphan at 4 years old and was educated for a time at the convent of Pantamon. A friend of her mother's, Lady de Bath, took her in hand after the suppression of the religious houses and entrusted her further training to two of the expelled nuns of Pantamon, Madame de Trelissac and de Sabotier. These ladies carried her off to their native district, and she lived with them first at Castle Sarasan and then at Périgueux, and perhaps at Montauban. Her paternal grandmother, Fanny de Beauharnais, was entirely occupied with Cubier's society verses and affairs of gallantry. Her father had emigrated. Her grandfather, the Marquis de Marnizia, was traveling in Pennsylvania. But for the Lady de Bath, the child would have been dependent on public charity. One day in the early part of the consulate, Josephine happened to mention her little cousin. Bonaparte, always keenly alive to family claims, was indignant that a relative of his wife's should have been left to the chance kindness of a stranger, and that stranger an Englishwoman. He dispatched a messenger with orders to bring the child back with him. The nuns refused to give her up, whereupon a second messenger arrived, empowering the prefect to seize Stephanie in the name of the law. Resistance was useless, and she obeyed the mandate, not without tears and terror. On her arrival, the child was placed under the care of Madame de Campan, and henceforth made one of that little band of young girls who were wont to assemble at Malmaison on the 10th day Decadi, and brighten the shade of the great chestnut trees with the flutter of their white dresses. Josephine and Hortense received her with great kindness, but she was treated with no sort of special distinction. She never appeared on gala days. No rank was assigned her, and it seemed probable that she would make some such marriage as had been arranged for her cousin Emily de Beauharnais. Madame Lavalette. The little lady, however, had other views for herself. She affected regal airs and treated those among her relatives who did not dwell in imperial palaces with scant courtesy. Such was the situation when Eugene's marriage made it necessary to provide for the Prince of Baden. Napoleon's first thought was of Stephanie Tascher. Another word of Josephine's. He finally fixed on Stephanie de Beauharnais, the preliminaries having been arranged by him when he passed through Karlsruhe on January 20th, 1806. The negotiations were formally ratified by a treaty signed in Paris on February 17th. Stephanie was then 17. She had a pleasing face, much natural wit and gaiety, a certain childishness of manner that was very attractive, a sweet voice, a lovely complexion, a pair of sparkling blue eyes, and beautiful fair hair. On the Emperor's return to Paris, she was at once removed from tutelage at the Tuileries and lodged in an apartment adjoining that of the Empress. In a very short time, she became the delight and amusement of the whole court. Her gay sallies, her youthful high spirits, her lively prattle relieved the tedium of court ceremony. Far from showing any timidity before the Emperor, her animation seemed to derive an added piquancy from his presence. She amused and charmed him, and the consciousness of her power to please gave her increased confidence. The interlude scarcely bordered on love-making, its elements being rather coquetry on Stephanie's part, flirtation on that of Napoleon. The Emperor may have felt inclined to go further, but his little protégée only wished to amuse herself and to profit as far as possible by the situation. She had no idea of compromising herself. She was perfectly aware that not Mademoiselle de Beauharnais, but a Napoleonid had been chosen to wed the Prince of Baden. On what footing was she to enter the family? What were to be her titles, her rank, her honors? All this depended solely on the Emperor, and Stephanie was not averse to furthering her prospects by means of the fancy she had inspired. Josephine, through her jealousy, may have begun to take alarm, showed no hostility to Stephanie. She had at least a consolation in knowing that the future princess had been provided by herself. The struggle was between Stephanie and Bonaparte's sisters, who had no idea of making way for the favorite. Both, but more especially Caroline Murat, defended their position with great acrimony and did not spare the little interloper. Stephanie held her own with gallantry, parrying the thrusts of her opponents with jests and laughter, which displayed her pretty teeth to much advantage. As she was well aware, exasperated beyond measure, Caroline had recourse to open insult. One evening, when the court was awaiting the Emperor's arrival, Stephanie seated herself on a folding stool. Caroline ordered her to rise and remember that she was expected to stand in the presence of His Majesty's sisters. Stephanie obeyed, no longer laughing. She burst into a flood of tears. At this moment the Emperor appeared, and noting her distress, which perhaps became her as well as her smiles, he inquired the cause of her emotion. "Is that all?" he said. "Well, come and sit on my knee. Then you will be in no one's way. We will not vouch for the authenticity of this anecdote, but it seems to be confirmed by the following instructions sent to the Grand Master of the ceremonies on the arrival of the Prince of Baden. Our intentions being that our daughter, the Princess Stephanie Napoleon, should enjoy all the privileges proper to her rank. We wish her to take her place by our side at all receptions, fetes, and banquets. In the event of our absence, she shall be placed on the Empress's right hand. By this decree, Stephanie took precedence of Julie, the future queen of Hortense, of all the Emperor's sisters as sisters-in-law, and even of the Princess Augusta, the wife of his adopted son. It was followed on the next day by a message to the Senate announcing the adoption of the Princess Stephanie Napoleon and her approaching marriage, and further by an order to all the great state bodies to send deputations to the ceremony. Among the delegates of the Senate was Monsieur Claude de Beauharnais, the princess's father, a returned emigre who had been a member since the year 7, with a salary of 25,000 francs. He was further rewarded for being the father of his charming daughter by the senatorship of Amiens with an income of 25,000 francs, by a pension of 25,882 francs in 1807, to say nothing of the post of Chevalier d'Honneur to Marie-Louise, with its accompanying 30,000 francs a year, and an award of 200,000 francs on September 22nd, 1807.